ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaskar, my dear friends. This is video number 7 on Ramana Gita. This video starts with chapter number 12, head and topic is on Shakti. The Sanskrit version of chapter 12 in Sri Ramana's handwriting has been uploaded to photo file Ramana Gita folder. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanath Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardwaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana, Bhagavan 4. For one to whom the subject is not different from the self, the object and the cognition also do not appear different from the self. 5. For one to whom, owing to attachment, the subject is different from the self, the object and the cognition too appear different from the self. 6. Even in this seeming ignorance, the Jnani perceives the essential unity. The ignorant one, caught in the seeming difference, considers himself as separate. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 4. For the one for whom the subject is not different from the self, the object and the cognition also do not appear different from the self. Commentary. For one whose self-abidance is steady, the vision is unitary, the separate perceiver I individual is not there. The subject seer is merged in the self. The wise would see the form and the waves and also the water in the ocean. Similarly, they would be aware of thought, waves and also of the self on which the moment takes place. The subject, the individual consciousness and the objects are seen as moments arising from the self and subsiding in it as one integral whole. The triads do not therefore exist. Verse 5. For those attached to the body, the subject is different from the self. The objects and the cognition too are different from the self. Commentary. He difference in the outlook of the wise and the ignorant is clearly explained so long as the seer, the mind or the ego is regarded as an independent entity, a separate source of consciousness. Dualistic vision alone will result. This springs as an attachment to the body or identification with a particular name and form. It is only through steady self-enquiry that the mind merges in its source, the self, till such time as the mind has not subsided in its source variety and not the underlying unity would be seen. Verse 6. Even in the difference, the essential unity is perceived by the wise. The ignorant, caught up in variety, considers himself as separate. Commentary. The mere fact that the Jnani, the wise one, is aware of the body and the world does not mean that his perception is the same as that of the ignorant. He is always aware of his true nature, of the totality of consciousness. The ignorant person makes the initial mistake of identification with a particular name and form, and so long as this identification is not cut at its root through self inquiry, everything else is seen as apart from oneself. The mind divides and separates. This divisive outlook is in direct contrast to the unitary perception of the wise. The difference therefore lies in the angles of vision. Satdarshanam, verse 18. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanath Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana Bhagavan 7. Kapali, Lord, that being in which these differences of triads appear, is it endowed with Shakti or devoid of Shakti? Bhagavan 8. Child, that being wherein these differences of triads appear is said to be all powerful by those who know Vedanta. On the 19th day, the high minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana 9. Kapali, that divine Shakti of which the Vedantins speak, is it dynamic or static? 10. Bhagwan, child, it is only because of the movement of Shakti that the worlds come into being, but the reality on which the movement is based never moves. A.R. Natarajan translation, verse 7. Lord, the self on which the triads appear, is it endowed with Shakti, power, or is it powerless? Commentary. The self is limitless, the unmoving substratum of all change. In movement, in action, alone can one see the expression of power. Does it mean that the unmoving one, the self, is devoid of power? Such doubts arise. The term Shakti has been translated as power in all the verses. Verse 8. Child, the self on which these differences of triads appear is said to be the repository of all power by those versed in Vedanta. Commentary. Vedic texts proclaim that the self is everything and that Brahma is all. Ramana too proclaims that Brahma alone shines as the Atma in the heart. Obviously, the all-pervasiveness of the self itself is evidence of its omnipotence. Again, God Isvara, though always revealing in the self, is the cause of creation, preservation, and destruction. Ramana had earlier clarified to Ganapati Muni that those who think that the wise are powerless are ignorant. Body and mind are both only matter ignited by the energy sources within the self. Ramana has explained earlier to the Muni the mechanics of it. The question of self being powerless cannot arise. Ramana Gita, chapter 12, verse 18, verse 9. The power of God referred to by those learned in Vedanta, is it dynamic or static? Commentary. The all powerful God is the ground, the unmoving principle is also the moment, the manifestation. In movement, one obviously perceives power, but can it be said that the ground too is powerful, even though devoid of movement or action? Movements or actions become powerful because of it. Not knowing the potency of Ramana's silent power, some would ask why he should not preach the truth to the people at large. Maharshi's replies is the opposite. How do you know that I am not doing it? Communication of knowledge can really be done in silence only. Ramana would point out that the Influence of Jnani steals into you in silence. The real force is within as the self, which though static is all powerful. Maharshi's Gospel, page 16. Verse 10. It is because of movement of power that the world comes into being. Dependent is form. Commentary. The ground on which it is, just as movement of pictures of a film can be seen only if there is a firm screen. The activity which causes the appearance of the world to the seer is not possible unless the base self is itself unmoving. In fact, the static aspect of power and the dynamic are non-separate. God and his power, though seen as the base and moment, are really one, like fire and its power to burn. The manifest aspect of reality, Shakti, is not apart from the unmanifest. Ramana points out that the seer, the scene, the screen on which it is projected, and the light are all only the one. Sat Darshanam, verse 9. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanath Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana, Bhagavan 11. The moment of Shakti, which is based on the immovable reality and which is the cause of the world, the learned term indefinable Maya. 12. The moment appears as if real to the subject. In reality, there is no moment in being. Oh, best of mean. 13. The seeming difference between Ishvara and Shakti arises from dualistic vision. If the vision is withdrawn into the source, the two become one. A.R. Natarajan translation, verse 11. The moment on the immovable, which is the cause of this world, is termed by the learned as the indescribable illusion. Commentary. The much bandied word Maya or illusion is used in this verse. Maya is indefinable because the moment seen apart from the reality, the substratum is illusory. The origin of this moment, said to be without a beginning, cannot be understood when one is in the state of ignorance. In the state of knowledge, the immovable and the superimposition will be seen integrally. For this, the knot of ignorance has to be cut by vigilant self-enquiry centered on the true import of individuality. Maya's will is in reality only the veil of thought. When the mind is impure and externalized, it is unaware of its link with its conscious source, the self. It is under the illusion that its power is independent. When one inquires into the nature of the mind and searches within for the source, employing the twin weapons in the Ramana armory, who am I and whence am I, then gradually the veil would be torn and the truth would be revealed. Verse 12. The moment is taken to be real by the subject. Actually, there is no moment of the self. Commentary. This is the illusion. The idea of movement is superimposed on the unmoving, as explained by Ramana earlier in this chapter. The first mistake is to regard the subject as separate from the self. Then the further mistake of considering the movements of this separate subject as the movements of the self itself would follow. Verse 13. Ishvara and his power are seen as separate because of dualistic vision. If the mind is merged into its source, the two become one. Commentary. Dualistic vision arises when ego rises on waking or in dream. Then, forgetting the source, the individual looks at everything divisively. If the ego is merged in the source by conscious effort, then oneness of perception is restored and wholeness of existence is felt. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanath Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana. Kapali 14. Bhagavan, this activity of Ishvara, which is the cause of this vast universe, is it eternal or not? Please enlighten me. 15. Bhagavan, though the Supreme moves because of his own Supreme Shakti, he is in reality unmoving. Only the sage can understand this profound mystery. 16. Movement by itself is activity, and activity is called Shakti. The Supreme Person, through his Shakti, created all that we see. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 14. Kapali said, Bhagavan is the activity of God which is the cause of this vast world eternal. Please clarify. Commentary. The doubt is raised because God is eternal. Can it be said that his activity too is eternal? Verse 15. Though movement is caused by the Supreme's inherent power, actually it is unmoving. This is a secret known only to sages. Commentary. In verse 12, Ramana has already explained that in reality there is no movement. Here he reiterates this proposition and puts a stop to the argument. Movement itself being illusory, the whole explanation relating to Ishvara and his powers is from the relative point of view. Since doubts would continue to arise, Ramana states that it is a secret known only to sages. Once a person learns to abide in the natural state, the truth would be revealed. Verse 16. Only movement is activity and it is termed power. Everything, everything seen is created by the Supreme Person through his own power. Commentary. The Creator and his power being one of the entire creation is the manifestation of his own power. Since nothing exists outside the one, the Supreme, everything, stability and movement can only be aspects of it. Ramana brings out the same idea in his Upadesha Saram, where he points out, is there another consciousness to light existence? Existence itself is the consciousness from which the I arises. Upadesha Saram, verse 22. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanatha Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana Bhagavan. 17. Activity is of two kinds. Pravrti, manifestation, and nirvrti, withdrawal. The Vedic text, where all this has become Atma itself, refers to nirvrti. 18. Thus the word sarvam, all this, refers to the many seen during dualistic vision. The word abhut has become implies some kind of activity. 19. The specific expression Atma itself implies that the multitude of diverse things born of it must in the end be withdrawn into the Atma. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 17. Activity comes under two categories, manifestation and subsidence. The Vedic text, when all has become the self, refers to subsidence. Verse 18. The word sarvam, all this, refers to the many seen during dualistic vision. The abhut has become implies some activity. Commentary. How can the real, the one, be the many? The answer is that it would be so when the dualistic vision prevails. The dualistic view persists until such time as the nature of the ego, of the mind, and its source are understood. It would persist till the illusion that the subject is separate from the self lost. The existence of the many would therefore be seen to be temporary. Verse 19. The expression self itself implies that the variety must in the end subside into the self commentary. If the multitude were independent of the self, they would have independent reality, a separate permanent existence. In fact, however, they arise and subside in one reality. Hence, though the forms are many, the substance, the essence is only the self. Those who are pursuing the method of self inquiry are familiar with the daily birth of the I thought or individuality on waking and its daily death when sleep overtakes the rising of the ego, and its subsidence would evidence the fact that it has a conscious source within the self. It is the self which lights the mind and the world and envelops all creation. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardwaja Kapali, great among the learned, questions Guru Ramana Bhagavan 20 on best of mean. Without Shakti, being is not apprehended. Shakti has two names, Vyapara, activity, and Asraya, ground. 21. The learned say that works such as the creation, sustenance, and dissolution of the universe is Vyapara, activity. On, O best of man, Asraya, ground is nothing other than being. 22. Because being is itself everything, it depends on nothing else. 70. Who he who understands Shakti as both activity and ground, he alone knows. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 20. Awareness of self is not possible without power. Power has two aspects, activity and ground. Commentary. Movement cannot be perceived without a stationary base. How is the opposite also true? How is it possible to apprehend the ground through movement, through power, when through self-inquiry the mind is pushed within? One becomes aware of the sparkle of the self as I within the heart. The movement referred to must therefore be understood as diving within, the inner journey linking one with consciousness. Verse 21. The learned say that work such as creation of the universe is movement self. Commentary. Creation includes the sustenance and dissolution of the world also. This is termed activity. The base of all the three is only the self. Verse 22. Self is not dependent on anything else because of its universality. He who understands it to be both moment and ground alone knows. Commentary. The ground is only the self, itself is the subject. The I complete and limitless. It is self luminous and the source of luminosity of all creation. In this verse, Ramana again stresses the integral nature of God, the manifest and unmanifest. Sat Darshanam. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardwaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana Bhagavan 23. In the activity, there can be no diversity for SAT, being. If Satta, nature of being, be other than Shakti, then no activity can ever rise. 24. If in course of time the great dissolution of the universe should occur, this activity merges as it were into being without any difference. 25. Without Shakti, none of this activity can ever be, neither creation nor cognition, consisting of the triad subject, object, and cognition. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 23. Diversity in reality would not arise in the absence of moment. The moment cannot exist apart from reality. Commentary. Once again, the interlaced nature of power and the ground are emphasized. Earlier, the Vedic text that self itself has become everything has been explained. Diverse forms for underlying reality can arise only if there is moment of thought away from the stillness of existence. Again, how can there be moment unless sustained by consciousness? Verse 24. In the course of time, the great dissolution of the universe should take place. This activity subsides into the one, the self. Commentary. What is referred to here is the Mahapralaya. What happens is only a lulling of activity for the time being and not destruction. It will sprout again when the new cycle of creation starts. Verse 25. All this activity is not possible without Shakti, power, neither the world nor the awareness of it, consisting of the triad. Commentary. The triad are he, seer, the seen, and the act of seeing. The mind's source is clearly indicated to be self by Ramana in Upadesa Saram. The mind's consciousness, its power, is the reflected power of the self. The world has no independent existence of its own. The mind projects the world and sees it. Hence it is said that neither the world nor the mind can exist without power, the power being that of the self. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation on the 19th day, the high-minded Bharadvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana. Bhagavan 26. The one transcendent Shakti is known by two names, being as ground and activity because of the work of creation. 27. Best of men, to those who consider movement alone to be the mark of Shakti, one has to point out that there exists some supreme reality as the ground. 28. That sole supreme reality is by some called Shakti, by others being, by others Brahma, and by still others person. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 26. The one transcendent power is known by two names, the self because it is the ground, and power because of the work of creation. Verse 27. To those who regard movement alone as the mark of power, one has to point out that there is one supreme reality as the base. Commentary. Ramana points out the fallacy of thinking that the activity alone is power. Then there should be two realities, the unmoving, unchanging, eternal source and the moment. Reality is only one, and as explained in the earlier verse, it is termed ground or activity with reference to the function. Verse 28. The one supreme reality is termed as Shakti by some as self, by other learned ones, and by yet others as a person. Commentary. The reality is only one. The learned call it by different names. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana. Bhagavan 29. There are two ways, child, in which truth is apprehended. It is defined in terms of its characteristics and it is directly experienced as reality. 30. Thus, knowledge of being can be had in two ways, through its activity or by experiencing it as such, that is, indirectly through its attributes, characteristics, or directly by being one with it. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 29. Truth is apprehended in two ways, by indication and in reality. By indication it is spoken of as real and it is experienced as reality. Commentary. Knowledge about reality is indirect when it arises from proper understanding of the scriptures through Guru's guidance. When one abides in the natural state, the experience is direct aproksha. Verse 30. Self-awareness can be had in two ways, through its activity or experiencing it as such by its attributes or by being with it. Commentary. Self has two characteristics, the asraya, that is ground and moment, or the mind and world. Logically, awareness of the self could be in one of two ways. It can be experienced directly inwardly by abiding in it and outwardly by perceiving that everything is the self. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana. Bhagavan 31. Being is said to be the ground and my child, and activity its attribute. By understanding through activity the source of activity, one gets firmly established in the ground. 32. Being goes with attributes and attributes go with being. The relation between the two, it is said, is one of identity. 33. As being is apprehended only by its attribute, namely activity, it is eternally active. Comment. It is interesting to note that the use of this term ground is one of 10 used by Master Eckhart, a non-dual Christian. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 31. It is said that self is the ground and activity is its attribute, source of activity. One gets firmly established in the self. Commentary. By understanding through activity, the Ramana brings one back to his teaching that the search for the source of the one for whom the activity exists leads one back to the self. According to him, self-inquiry is the inquiry wherefrom does this I thought arise. When the source is searched for, the ego gets merged in it. Elsewhere too, Ramana emphasizes this to inquire silently and deeply as to the source of the mind. The I alone is self-inquiry. The I does not rise in the real state. Search for the source of I dissolves it. When the I rises, all rises. Find out with keen intellect whence this I. Quest for the source is the activity which leads one back to the self and merges one there. Upadesasram, verse 19. Ramana Gita, chapter 7, verse 4 and 5. Sat Darshanam, verse 9. Verse 32, self goes with attribute and vice versa. The two are inseparable. Verse 33, since the self is known only by its attribute, activity, it is eternally active. Commentary. Reference could be made to earlier verses 24 and 25, wherein it has been pointed out that activity goes on in time without let and is possible only because of the power of the self. Therefore, it is only the manifest aspect of self which is known. Since this goes on always, it could be said the self is eternally active. The eternal nature of activity has been explained to Kapali Sastri, who queried, worlds are created and they perish. How can you say that activity is eternal? Ramana replies, every moment there is creation, every moment destruction. There is no absolute creation and absolute. Both are moment and that is eternal. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanatha Swami translation. On the 19th day, the high-minded Bhardvaja Kapali, great among the learned, questioned Guru Ramana. Bhagavan 34. Activity is not other than being. If you see, indeed, all this knowledge of difference is but imaginary. Verse 35. This creation called the sport of Shakti is only an idea of Isvara. If the idea is transcended, being alone remains. This ends chapter 12 from the Ramana Gita, the science of Brahma and the scripture of yoga, composed by Ramana's disciple Vasishta Ganapati. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 34. If one understands properly, activity is not different from the ground. The thought that they are different would be conjectural. Commentary. Having stated in the preceding verse that self is seen to be eternally active, Ramana brings one back to the proposition which he has repeatedly emphasized in this chapter, namely that it is the characteristics, activity, and stillness which seem to give an appearance of difference, but in reality the self is only one. Why does Ramana call the idea that the two are different imaginary? It is because it springs from the thought that the subject is separate from the self. The ego, imagining itself to be different from the self, is unaware of its essential strength and its link with consciousness. The false knowledge ends when, through properly directed enquiry, the doership idea is uprooted. Verse 35. The creation termed the sport of power, that is an idea of God only. If the idea is transcended, the self remains. Commentary. The multifarious creation is born of the eternal activity of God, Isvara. It is called a Leela, a sport of his powers, his Shakti. The Creator is not apart from his creation and is the consciousness, the substratum of everything. It is for this reason that Isvaraya Upanishad, Isavasya Upanishad declare that Isvara pervades the entire universe. The difference between the idea of creation and that of the individual is that the Creator is omniscient and omnipotent. His intelligence is unfettered by attachments and his powers are limitless. The individual's creation is the product of a mind which is dissipated by attachments and the limitations of inadequate powers are superimposed on it. In the second half of the verse, Ramana reverts to his basic teaching that the world and mind exist so long as mind's nature is not understood. If by search for its source the mind merges in the source, the self, then all ideation, all conceptualization would cease. For the individual for whom conceptualization exists would cease to exist. All that would remain is the one true seer. If this happens, the differences which exist between God and individual would come to an end. The difference was one of form and intelligence. God's form is the universe in all its variety, the individual's a particular name and form. God's intelligence is complete, that of the individual is warped and limited. But once the import of the true I is apprehended, these differences are lost and the one essence remains. Upadesasram, verse 24, Sanskrit version in Ramana's handwriting can be seen in photo file Ramana Gita album. Chapter 13, verse 1, 2, 3, 4, translation Sri Kapali Sastriar. Here the wife of the Muni is the questioner. Um, Here the wife of the Muni is the questioner. Ganapati introduces her first in four poetic version 1 to 4. Like moon, light to the family of Atris, the daughter-in-law to the house of Vasishtas, mother of Mahadeva of resolved mind, drawn towards God, knowledge, and exemplar of woman, unwavering in the austerity of service to people, holding the great discipline of knowledge, lauded by Brahma and other gods, the first and foremost perceptor of the Vidya of goddess Tara in the south of the Vindhyas, famous as companion in my austerities, Visalaksi of unblemished limbs, dear to me, approves the sage Ramana, benefactor of the world, with two questions put through my mouth. End of chapter 12 on Shakti. Chapter 13 on the equality of women for sannyasa. I conclude this video at this stage. Next video number 8 will start with chapter 13 of Ramana Gita. Thank you.